Well, joining us to talk about how gray rhinos are affecting China's economy is the person who coined the term itself, Michele Wucker. She's the author of The Gray Rhino, How to Recognize and Act on the Obvious Dangers We Ignore, and founder of strategic advisory firm Gray Rhino Company. Welcome, Michele.
Thanks for having me.
Now, for people who aren't familiar, black swan events in economies are considered impossible to predict. But can black swans sometimes be gray rhinos in disguise?
I often think about a black swan as a group of gray rhinos coming together, and what's absolutely beautiful is that the zoologically correct term for a group of gray rhinos is actually a crash. So I like to say behind many black swans are a crash of many gray rhinos, lots and lots of avoidable, preventable crises that are all coming together. And when they come together in a way that is extremely unpredictable, you can look back at the origins of many things that were very clear to many people, were very obvious, but didn't get the attention that they should have had.
Now, let's take a look at what's happening with China's economy. We saw some cooling compared to the first half of the year, but then the National Bureau of Statistics said that overall economic performance for July was steady with continued sound momentum. What were the biggest takeaways for you from this data?
Well, I think month-to-month economic data is almost looking at too many trees and not quite seeing the forest. I think that the big picture is the trend. Where are things going? Where's general monetary policy going? Where's the stock market going? Where are the bubbles and what's happening to them? And also, is money going into the real economy, or is it just going into speculative investments? And that's where you really see a lot of the gray rhinos, is that money is being pumped into the economy, but it's not always being used as productively as it could. And that's not a problem that's isolated to China. It's something countries around the world have right now.
So let's explore some of the momentum in certain risks. Let's start with debt. How substantial are the risks posed by some of these really highly indebted companies that regulators are trying to address?
Well, it's the kind of thing that they could have addressed earlier. It's good that they're addressing it now and not later. I think that the Chinese government is very wise to take it very, very seriously. The United States has a lot of very highly indebted companies as well, but you don't see the kind of attention here to that you're seeing in China. So it's very gratifying to see that China is using the gray rhino concept to draw attention and to really focus on the things that are important to the economy's future.
And we certainly saw that strategy with the property market. How much pressure is that putting on the economy? I know that the government is taking steps to really cool the market. How is that affecting the overall economy, though?
Well, the property market is interesting because it is so tied to the real economy, to construction that creates a tremendous number of jobs. A lot of raw materials go into that. But it also creates a big problem in daily living standards, because if you have so much speculation in housing that middle-class people can no longer find a way to live, you're starting to really disrupt the way people work, where they live, what they do, and that becomes a drag on the real economy. So you can't separate the real estate bubble from the rest of the economy. And just as in the United States, the subprime crisis tumbled down all sorts of other dominoes in the economy, the real estate crisis, pending real estate crisis in China is something that has the potential to run over a lot of other things if it goes down.
So what do you think of the strategy of Beijing's efforts to really try and fend off these gray rhino risks, and what else needs to be done?
Well, certainly signaling the importance is good. We've seen a change in the States as well, more and more signaling of monetary policy, of different policy changes that will shape the direction of markets. I think one lesson that China could learn from the United States was when the subprime mortgage crisis happened here, there was a lot of attention to the banks, to the top tier of the financial system where there were problems, but not enough to people farther down. And so that's where I think the Chinese government should really, really focus on when the real estate bubble pops and when the air comes out of it, how's that going to affect not the speculators, but the regular people?
And so, speaking of regular people, you also have individual investors watching what's happening. What should they be doing in China?
Well, investing is interesting because you've got people with a very short-term strategy, you've got medium, you've got the long-term strategy. And I think that when you're looking at a bunch of gray rhinos, you don't know exactly when they're going to happen. You want to find out what the potential triggers are. What's the turning point where this might make things go very, very sour? What would be the time to get out? Or alternatively, if you are looking at a long-term investment, what's the indicator that would suggest that you needed to go in? And in a lot of emerging markets, which I've written about quite a bit, in many cases, the time to go in is when the government is making difficult decisions that are destabilizing to the markets in the short term, but provide an opportunity to go in when governments are making the hard decisions that provide much better longer-term opportunities. So figuring out what the signals are, what might mean things are going worse, what might be a clear signal of very strong progress forward towards the future.
And just quickly, if you had to give some advice, how can countries get a better handle on really identifying and addressing some of these obvious dangers before they escalate?
Well, it's funny. Many people say, well, it's obvious we're dealing with it. It's not, why are you focusing on obvious things? Because that's not counterintuitive. And I said, no, people forget just how bad we are at dealing with the obvious. In the United States, some of the biggest corporate crises followed many, many, many years of warnings. You look at the GM ignition switch, you look at the Wells Fargo disaster, you look at the VW emissions. All of these things were highly avoidable. They were obvious problems that did not get the attention they deserved, perhaps because people underestimated the costs, thought they could get away with things. So people really do need to take a fresh look at the obvious, because that's where they're not doing a good job, and it's where they've got the most ability to change things and avoid getting trampled in the future.
Well, hopefully this interview will act as a wake-up call. Thank you so much.